All right. So there's by way of curiosity, there's two things that anytime I meet an artist that I respect or whose work that I've seen has made impact on me, there's two questions that I always ask, or two ideas that I'm always curious about. One, what's the question that's driving your work, whether currently or just something that's been a theme? And then two, how do you think about your relationship with audience?
To answer the second one first, I don't think about audience. I don't think about audience in a living sense. I perhaps think about being in having an audience of ancestors, which is
Mm,
more of a guiding practice for me.
mhm.
The living audience is fluid and sometimes flimsy, and you actually can't control
Mm, mhm.
the reality, the material reality of what happens when you release something into the world and people interpret it the way they're going to interpret it.
Right.
I think I can more rigidly fix myself on an audience of ancestors, particularly folks who are no longer living,
Right.
and say that I am reaching for um, an attempt to be adequately in a lineage. Because the thing about lineage is that the people who we're in lineage with, particularly if they're not living, they don't really care whether or not we position ourselves in a lineage with them. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not any of their business. But to do that means that we then have a responsibility to the lineage that we are claiming.
Right. That's a good
And
point.
that's the audience I'm most interested in. You know what I mean? Like I also think that's the central question driving my work is um, am I living up to a standard set by the lineage that I imagine myself to be in?
Mhm.
Not even just a lineage that's steeped in artistic work, but one that is steeped in personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Like what I love about your work and a lot of artists here actually is like folks stay. This is a city where folks can stay and do their work. You know
Right.
what I mean? Um, Columbus has not always felt like that, even though I stay and do my work there. But
Mhm.
New Orleans, like people stay here and do their work. So you're also operating in a lineage of like actual geographical history. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It's that's a good point, and it's hard to run from that when you're physically here.
When you're there, yep.
Yeah, it's like it becomes like I love the way, and I know this isn't once again I'm trying to compartmentalize for later, but I love the way you ended your current book or your latest book in terms of how you sort of grappled with place and like being in the space and what it means and all the layers of what it can mean. Because I think there's so many overlaps with New Orleans. When I was reading that last part, I was like, okay, this is why I find being based in New Orleans and from New Orleans so important. It's like I can reclaim, or it's like the palimpsest of it all is like knowing what it is to me, what I'm covering it with in real time, but also knowing what it's been prior to me, and it's always present. It's not, you can't wash it clean with a brand new slate. It's always a part of it.
And your work, you also do work with young folks. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so like the very nature of saying I'm gonna bring young folks into this space and work alongside them, like young folks who live in the city, and I'm gonna work alongside them. Yeah, you're like teaching them things, of course, but what you're also just doing when I was a kid, the greatest artist who's ever lived in Columbus is Amina Robinson. May she rest in peace. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, we used to just be able to go to her studio. She had a little
Yeah.
studio at the
Yeah.
like Black Arts Center on the East Columbus. We used to just go there and watch her work, and then
Yeah.
sometimes like draw little stick figures or whatever alongside her. That alone, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
sure, it's cool if you're teaching the young folks something, but to say, in your case, to say like, I have a studio where I do my work and y'all are welcome here whenever. That
Yeah.
alone is a kind of like lineage building permission.
Yeah, I've never been attracted to creativity or creating as a means of like the plane ticket elsewhere. It's
No, no,
like
no,
this
no.
is the way to get to there.
Yeah.
And I had to go through that though. Like there definitely was a point. I think a lot of my peers went through this phase where you felt the only way to validate how impactful you can be was how many people from afar can like respond or
Right.
uplift, etc.
Right.
And then you get to a point where you're like, nah, that's not the that doesn't feel as impactful or important. Um, and that's why so much of like your work is like it feels like a conversation with something. It's almost like the way in which I think about call and response,
Oh
like
yeah.
the
Yeah.
way in which I think about the best aspects of New Orleans music or just black music in general. Is like the idea that you can't do it. It's not just a stage and a person. It's like it requires that level
It's an
of
exchange.
echo. Yeah, that
Yeah.
exchange.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate about the work that you've created is this idea of like how it exists in response to things that I'm also curious about, or that's also find fascinating. How are you like always making mental notes about a thing and say, "Oh, this is interesting," and I'm gonna make a mental note and then I'm gonna return back to it and respond
Yeah,
to it.
it's like building an archive, right? I think to
Yeah.
live well and to like live a curious life for me is to build an archive of things that delight me, things that interest me, things that I am hearing or seeing and understanding I don't have to write about all of them. I don't even have to engage with all of them beyond placing them in kind of like the file, the
Right.
internal file of my own like mind, my own excitement file, my own file of interests.
Mhm.
But to even have them there and to that slows me down. That allows me to slow down and think about the world differently. To walk outside and say, I am going to live as though I might encounter something that's going to change me
Mm.
eternally.
Yeah.
Even if I don't, it
Right.
doesn't matter. But the upside is I might. And I am
Right.
preparing myself for the kind of slow, what the writer Ross Gay would call close attention, like preparing
Mm.
myself to move through the world with the responsibility towards close attention.
Mhm.
Because I don't, what? I was thinking about this recently because I listen to so much new music all the time,
Mhm.
because at heart I'm a music critic. I'm still a music critic. That's like the thing that got me, you know, if we're talking about like getting out the mud, that's how I was writing reviews for like $100.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was it for me in the early 2010s. And so I don't ever want to be one of those people who's like, there's no such thing as good music anymore.
Right.
And I think people get to that place because they're not actually interested in close listening.
Right. That's a good
And
point.
I cannot rob myself of that because um, I I'm cynical about so many things. It's a
Mhm.
massive flaw of mine, right? But
Mhm.
I'm never going to be cynical about the fact that I might encounter something that changes me
It's in a
from a
beautiful way.
standpoint of like cultural consumption.
Right.
And so that requires just saying, all right, I'm gonna enter the world and subject myself. I'm gonna surrender to my desire for giving close attention and just see where it goes.
Yeah, I liken it to the process of creating pottery or working with
Yeah,
clay, where it seems like the natural thing that happens as you get old is that you just start to get hard. Like the whatever was molded in you, whatever impacted you, just becomes a little bit permanent. And it feels like as I'm getting older, that the goal of being older is to constantly be malleable enough that you're not just the same thing you were when you, it's like to
absolutely,
be able to
Sam. Like,
shift. And that's what working with youth has been helpful to me because it constantly forces me like to
yes.
shift because I can't be what I was. They're constantly teaching me new things or making jokes about me if I do remain rigid in
Yep.
what I was.
That's the thing too, because I work with young writers all the time, and you don't want to be like you don't want to fall victim to getting joked, And it's kind of that same impulse that we had as young people, where it's like
Right,
you don't want to fall victim to getting, the
right.
dozens are popping off. You don't want to be the victim,
No, exactly.
you
And
know.
there's a thin line between like how to not cosplaying like you're young,
Nah.
but basically being one of the youth the other day, we was doing like this video shoot and I don't know what I had on, some Travis Scott's or something. And she was like, "Oh, you," because I was complimenting them. I said, "Oh, everybody came fresh today." Normally, I see them with their paint clothes. I'm like, "Look, everybody came fresh," and they looked at me and it was like, "You too old to be wearing Travis Scott's." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" So there's definitely this layer of like, okay, I'm not trying to cosplay. One, that's ridiculous that they would say that. That's not. But anyway, but one, I'm not trying to cosplay like I'm young, but it's definitely about that balance of how do you still stay curious about your process and also playful too.
Absolutely. And it's also about respect. Like for me, it's also about respect. It's like
Yeah.
I respect you enough to honor the world you operate in while not
Yeah,
trying to encroach upon it.
that's a good
You know what I mean?
point.
Like that's
Yeah.
where it's like I'm not trying to be like a 17-year-old, but
Right.
I respect the world you operate in
Right.
because you are teaching me. Like I always say with young writers I work with, I'm always on the same shit where I'm like, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a
Hmm.
parent. You know what I mean? Like the minute you step into this room, we're all writers, we're all peers.
Right.
Doesn't matter if I've won awards or published books.
That's a good point.
Like
That's a
we
good way to
have
put it.
a responsibility to teach each other something.
Right.
And so therefore you have to rise to the occasion. If I'm,
Yeah.
what I mean? Like this is, you know, shield, steel, sharpen steel, and I'll
Yeah.
take it where I can get it. You know
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean?
a
If
good
a
point.
13-year-old's writing their ass off and can teach me something, it don't matter to me.
Yeah.
And so it is a thing where it's like, yeah, I'm not trying to be a young, but I also like respect the world you're operating in if I can learn from it. Like if I can learn from the work
Right.
you're doing in your, what Toni
Right.
Morrison calls your own particularized world. If you are offering me a window through which I can learn something about my world, then I'll take it where I can get it.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a an elder here who's no longer here, but I'm not gonna call his name because it's kind of slight. it's like this. But he would say with his students, he would be like, okay, take advantage of me as your teacher now, because soon as you graduate, you're my competition.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think I never wanted to view it in that context of
No.
like, okay, we're in this marketplace that forces us to sort of like see each other as as opposition.